My wife and I bought a cottage on Cape Cod almost 3 decades ago, but we left it behind when we moved into the heart of Boston for my career. I hadn't set foot in that cottage for 26 long years. She, on the other hand, drove out there 4 times every single year, like clockwork. When she passed away last winter, my son looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Dad, just dump that worthless shack already." I decided I needed to see it one final time before signing it away. But the moment I pushed open that corroded iron gate, I stopped breathing. What I saw living inside that house, it shattered everything I thought I knew. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Stay with me through this whole story. It gets heavier than you might expect. And please, drop a comment with the city you're listening from, because it genuinely warms my heart to see how far these stories travel. My name is Walter. I'm 74 years old, and 7 months ago I lowered the only woman who ever truly saw me into the cold Massachusetts ground. Eleanor was my entire world for 41 years of marriage. And now I sit in a hollow brownstone on Beacon Hill, while my own flesh and blood treat me like an inconvenient task on their weekly to-do list. Now, before I get too far into this, let me just say something from the heart. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, if you've ever felt like just another item on someone's calendar, I want you to know I see you. I really do. Because what I'm about to share, it took me 74 years to understand. The phone rang at exactly 7:32 on a frozen Tuesday morning, same as it had every Tuesday for the last 6 weeks. My oldest, Bradley, doesn't even pretend to say good morning anymore. "Pop, we need to circle back on the Cape Cod situation again." His voice had that flat corporate tone, the one he reserves for clients he thinks are wasting his time. "You're hemorrhaging cash on that dump." I gripped the porcelain mug Eleanor had given me on our final Christmas together, the one with our wedding portrait baked into the ceramic. My fingers weren't as steady as they used to be. The handle felt thinner somehow. "It's not hemorrhaging, Bradley. Your mother adored that place." "Mom's been gone for over half a year, Pop." Those words landed like a hammer to my chest. "Caroline and I have been having serious conversations, and we believe it's high time you started behaving like a responsible adult about your assets." Caroline, my daughter, had been just as cold-blooded as her brother. She called me every other day with the same scripted lecture about budgeting and end-of-life planning, as though I were some senile relic who couldn't operate a microwave. "The yearly property taxes alone run you $5,200, Bradley pressed on. "Then add insurance, the heating bill, the lawn service, the seawall maintenance. You're bleeding close to 17 grand a year on a property you haven't laid eyes on since Reagan was president." Haven't laid eyes on. That part actually hurt. Because it was true. Eleanor visited that cottage 4 times a year, every single year, without skipping once. Spring blossom season, peak summer, October leaves, and one trip every February she always called her quiet weeks. She invited me along every single time, and every single time I had a reason, work deadlines, even years after I'd retired from the architectural firm. A standing tea time with the boys at the country club. Routine cardiology appointments I could have shifted by a week. Now, sitting alone in our silent kitchen, I started asking myself something I'd never wanted to ask before. Why had I been so unwilling to go? Maybe because that little cottage represented something I never quite grasped about my wife. Some private chamber of her soul she kept walled off from the life we shared. Now, let me pause here for a second. Because if you've been married a long time, you might know what I mean. Sometimes the person sleeping next to you for 40 years has whole rooms inside them you've never visited, and it's not because they're hiding. It's because you stopped asking. "Your mother poured so much of herself into that home," I said quietly, watching a chickadee land on the feeder Eleanor had bolted to our kitchen window. "Pop, listen to yourself." Bradley's voice sharpened into a blade. "Sentiment doesn't pay the gas bill. You're on a fixed income now. Pension and Social Security only stretch so far, especially with what nursing care costs these days." This was always his angle, the almighty spreadsheet. Bradley worked in commercial real estate up in Manhattan, so to him every roof and foundation was just an asset class. He'd inherited his mother's mathematical gift, but absolutely none of her gentleness. "Have you actually walked through that house since Mom died?" Caroline's voice cut through the speakerphone. She must have been listening on the line from her townhouse in Cambridge. "Because I drove out there last month, Pop, and I'm telling you, it's a wreck. The shingles are warped. The gate looks like it's been left in salt water for a decade. The whole property looks abandoned. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Eleanor had kept that cottage spotless. She used to tell me about every detail with this gleam in her eye. The hydrangeas she'd planted along the picket fence, the rocking chairs she'd arranged just so on the wraparound porch, the brass wind chimes near the kitchen window. If the cottage was falling apart now, that meant she really, truly was gone. Maybe I should drive out there, I said softly. What in God's name for? Bradley jumped in immediately. Pop, you're 74 years old. You have absolutely no business driving 4 hours each way to gawk at a property you're going to liquidate anyway. Just hand it to a broker and walk away. 74. He said it like I was already in a coffin. Like they were doing me a favor by letting me sign my own checks. Eleanor would have lost her mind if she'd heard the way they spoke to me. You know what? If you're listening right now and your kids talk to you like that, I want you to remember something. Age isn't a disease. Grief isn't dementia. And being old doesn't mean you stopped having a vote in your own life. The market is white hot right now, Caroline added in that smooth realtor voice she'd picked up somewhere. Cape properties are pulling in $350, $400 grand. That's serious money, Pop. Money that could fund proper assisted living when the time comes. Assisted living. They'd been sliding that phrase into every conversation for months, as if burying my wife had simultaneously stripped me of the ability to cook eggs or read a newspaper. I'm not ready for assisted living, I said firmly. Of course not, Pop, Bradley answered with that condescending lilt. But planning ahead is just smart, and selling the Cape would give you flexibility. Flexibility, that word. They made it sound like generosity. But I'd seen the way Bradley's eyes had lingered on Eleanor's pearl strands when we packed up her vanity. I'd noticed how Caroline had quietly walked off with the heirloom silver tea set for safekeeping. I need time to think, I told them. Pop, you've had over 6 months to think. Caroline's voice carried that impatient edge she usually saved for her teenage sons. How much more time could you possibly need? 6 months. Had it really been that long since I held Eleanor's hand in that hospital bed, feeling her fingers go cool while machines whined their final mechanical goodbyes? It felt like yesterday. It felt like 100 years ago, both at once. Every month you delay is another month of waste, Bradley pushed. And honestly, Pop, we're getting concerned about your judgment lately. Yesterday you couldn't recall whether you'd paid the gas company, but you're clinging to a property that costs over $1,000 every 30 days. That one stung, because there was a sliver of truth to it. My mind had been wading through fog ever since Eleanor died. Some afternoons I'd forget to eat lunch entirely. Other days I'd wander into the den, stand in the middle of the room, and have absolutely no idea why I'd gone in there. Grief had wrapped itself around my brain like wet wool. Now, if you've ever lost someone you truly loved, you understand exactly what I'm describing. It's not stupidity, it's not weakness, it's just your soul learning how to walk again with one leg gone. Maybe Bradley's right, Caroline said, gentling her voice. Maybe simplifying your life would be healthier, stripping away unnecessary expenses so you can focus on yourself. Focus on myself. Such a sterile little phrase for the impossible task of learning how to exist without the woman who had been my partner for nearly 4 decades. I'll think it over, I repeated. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew this answer wouldn't satisfy them much longer. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of our kitchen, surrounded by Eleanor's ghosts. Her reading glasses still rested on the granite counter beside Sunday's Globe. Her favorite teacup, the one with the painted bluebells, still sat in the dish rack where I'd washed it the morning the ambulance came. Maybe they were right. Maybe holding on to that cottage was just postponing the obvious. Maybe it was time to release the last unmapped corner of Eleanor's life, a corner I'd never bothered to explore. 3 weeks slid by before I finally caved and dialed Bradley back. The pressure had been merciless. Daily phone calls, surprise drop-ins where Caroline would walk through my brownstone with a notepad, cataloging things she said needed repair. And worst of all, those carefully placed hints that maybe I shouldn't be making my own decisions anymore. I'll do it, I said when Bradley picked up. I'll sell the Cape. The relief in his voice was instant. Too instant. Pop, that's terrific. Genuinely, that's the smart play. I have a broker, a top closer in Provincetown, who handles luxury coastal listings. She moves properties fast. Moves properties fast. That seemed to be the only adjective my children valued anymore. Not meaningful, not memorable, not the simple fact that this had been their mother's sanctuary. Before we list it, I want to drive out there one more time, I said. There may be personal items still inside. A long pause. Pop, is that really required? What could possibly be worth a 4-hour round trip? Your mother spent a lot of her life in that house, Bradley. There might be photographs, journals, things that matter. Another pause, even longer. All right, but you're not going alone. Caroline and I will come with you. We'll help you triage everything. The very last thing I wanted was my children rifling through Eleanor's private belongings, snap-judging what was treasure and what was trash. They'd already done plenty of that when we cleared her closet here in Boston. I need to do this myself, I said firmly. Pop, you're talking about a 4-hour drive each way. What if the car breaks down? What if you have a cardiac event? Cardiac event. They'd been weaponizing that phrase for months now, as though I were a faulty machine just waiting to short-circuit. Yes, I was 74. Yes, I took medication for blood pressure and a mild atrial flutter. But I was not an invalid. I'll be fine, Bradley. I've been driving longer than you've been breathing. That's exactly what concerns me, Caroline cut in. She'd been listening on the extension again, of course. Your reaction time isn't what it used to be, Pop. And you've been so scattered. Scattered. That was their polite shorthand for thinking grief had broken my brain. And maybe they weren't entirely wrong. I had been forgetting things. Losing chunks of afternoons. Catching myself staring at a single wallpaper seam for an hour without blinking. But this trip felt necessary in a way I couldn't put into words. I'm going, I told them, pushing more steel into my voice than I felt. Either you trust me with this, or you don't. Of course we trust you, Pop, Bradley said too quickly. We just worry. Maybe at least let us know when you leave and when you arrive safely? Check-ins. Like I was a 16-year-old with a learner's permit. But I agreed. Because arguing was exhausting. And because some small, soft place in me wanted to believe their concern came from love and not from inheritance math. I planned the trip for the following Saturday. Bradley offered to hire me a car service. I declined. This needed to be solitary. No witnesses. No running commentary about practicality. The night before I left, I sat in Eleanor's reading nook and pulled down the leather photo albums she'd kept so meticulously labeled. Pictures from our courtship at Boston University. Our wedding at the Old North Church. The kids, when they were small and still climbed onto my lap at bedtime. But as I flipped through the more recent volumes, something began to nag at me. The photographs grew sparser, and in nearly all the recent ones, Eleanor was alone. There she was on the cottage porch, a hardcover novel resting on her knees. Another shot of her kneeling in what looked like a vegetable patch, though I had no memory of her ever planting anything at the Cape. In several pictures, she was smiling, but it was a smile I almost didn't recognize. Softer, lighter. The way a woman smiles when she's stopped performing for anyone. When was the last time she'd smiled at me like that? When had we stopped showing up in each other's photographs? I closed the album. I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept circling back to those images, to the woman who had shared my pillow for 41 years, yet had clearly preserved an entire chapter of herself somewhere I'd never read. Why had she stopped insisting I come to the Cape with her? Had she even wanted me there anymore? The next morning I packed the Buick with the kind of supplies Eleanor would have demanded. Bottled water, granola bars, a first aid kit, a car charger for my phone. She had always been the planner, the woman 3 steps ahead while I lived 2 steps behind. The drive took longer than I'd estimated. My hands cramped on the wheel. I pulled over twice, once at a Cumberland Farms in Plymouth, once at a rest stop near Bourne. By the time I crossed the Sagamore Bridge onto the Cape, the late afternoon sun was painting everything in copper and salt. I'd forgotten how beautiful this stretch of coastline was. Eleanor had tried to describe it to me 100 times across the years. The way the light hit the marsh grass, the smell of pitch pine, the ridiculously blue color of the bay in October. I'd never really listened. Now, seeing it through my own eyes, I understood why this place had pulled at her so hard. Something about the landscape made the noise of regular life feel quiet for a moment. The turn-off onto our private lane was marked by a weathered cedar sign reading Salt Meadow Lane. I'd written the check for that sign 15 years ago, but I'd never seen it in person. Eleanor had handled every detail of maintaining the cottage for decades. Taxes, contractors, the seasonal opening and closing. As I rolled down the narrow lane toward our cottage, my chest constricted with an awful mix of dread and longing. What was I going to find? What truths had Eleanor tucked away in this place? The cottage stood at the end of the lane, half hidden behind beech plum bushes and tall seagrass. I could see Caroline had been correct about neglect, at least from the road. The shingles were faded silver. The wrought iron gate at the front walk had grown a thin coat of rust. I pulled into the crushed shell driveway and just sat there, engine ticking, listening to the soft thunder of the surf beyond the dunes. Eleanor used to say the Atlantic spoke to her in a language she didn't have to translate. Now I could finally hear what she'd meant. There was something hypnotic in that rhythm, something that slowed time itself. I took a long breath, fished the brass key from my coat pocket, and walked toward the gate. My hands were trembling. Whatever waited on the other side was going to rearrange everything I thought I knew about my wife and my marriage. The rusted hinges screamed as I pulled the gate open, and then I froze. Because what I saw inside that yard was not abandonment, not at all. The yard was breathtaking, not just maintained, loved. Marigolds and black-eyed Susans bloomed in tidy rows along the flagstone walkway. The lawn had been freshly mowed. The green smell still hung in the air. Someone had carefully replaced the warped boards on the porch steps with fresh cedar planks. This was not the abandoned property Caroline had described. Someone was living here. My first instinct was to retreat to the car and call the Barnstable police. We'd had problems years ago with squatters, kids breaking into summer homes. But then I noticed something that froze me in place. Hanging from the porch railing was a wind chime. I knew that wind chime. Eleanor had bought it at the Wellfleet flea market 4 summers ago. I remembered because she'd been so giddy about it, and I'd grumbled about the $18. The sound of children laughing drifted from somewhere behind the cottage. Then a woman's voice, calling out in Spanish, gentle but firm, telling someone to be careful near the dunes. My Spanish was rusty from a high school class 58 years ago, but I caught enough. I walked up the front steps slowly, my heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. The front door was painted soft buttercup yellow, Eleanor's favorite color. Terracotta planters flanked the doorway, overflowing with rosemary and basil. Through the window, I could see furniture I half remembered from decades ago, mixed with newer pieces I'd never laid eyes on. Before I could even raise my fist to knock, the door swung open. A small woman stood there, maybe mid-50s. Light brown skin, dark hair streaked with silver, and pulled into a low knot. She wore a faded denim apron over a soft cotton dress, and she held a wooden spoon in one hand. When she saw me, her face went absolutely white. "Senor Walter," she whispered, in lightly accented English. She knew my name. This stranger living in my cottage knew exactly who I was. "I'm sorry," I managed. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. This is my property. My wife and I own this house." Tears welled instantly in her eyes. She pressed the wooden spoon to her chest like a shield. "Senora Eleanor. She is?" "She passed away," I said quietly, even as my mind raced. 7 months ago." The woman covered her mouth and let out a soft, gut-deep sob. The kind of sob you only make when you've lost someone who meant something. How did this woman know my wife so intimately? How was she crying like she'd lost her own mother? Now, let me just say something here. Because in that moment, watching this stranger weep for my wife, I felt something shift inside my chest. Something cold and stiff that had been there for months. Because nobody had cried for Eleanor like this except me. Not even our own children. They'd cried at the wake, but it had been composed, acceptable, manageable. This woman cried like the world had cracked. "Please," she said, stepping back and waving me inside. "Please come in. I will explain. My name is Lourdes Reyes." I hesitated for a long moment, and then crossed the threshold. Inside, the living room had been transformed. The bones were the same fieldstone fireplace, the same exposed beams. But the soul was completely different. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece. Children's crayon drawings clung to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like seashells. A wicker basket of yarn and knitting needles sat beside a worn armchair near the window. "You've been living here," I said. It was not a question. Lourdes nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. 16 years, she said softly. Senora Eleanor. She saved my family. 16 years. I tried to do the math and my brain refused to cooperate. Eleanor knew you were living here for 16 years? She bring us here after Hurricane Wilma, Lourdes explained, sinking into the armchair. We lose everything in Florida. The house, my husband's mechanic shop, all of it. We come north looking for work, but we have nothing. Nowhere. We were sleeping in a shelter in New Bedford. And Senora Eleanor, she was volunteering there. She find us. Hurricane Wilma. That was 2005. Eleanor had driven down to the Cape that fall. Yes, I remembered now, vaguely. She'd said something about needing to check on the cottage. She'd come back saying everything was fine. Just minor damage. Already handled. She'd never said a single word about a homeless family in a shelter. She'd tell us we can stay until we get on our feet, Lourdes continued. But then my Tomas, he gets sick, pancreas cancer. And Senora Eleanor, she say we are family now. She say this is our home too. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her. My legs simply gave out. Your husband had cancer. 4 years he fight, Lourdes said, fresh tears spilling. Senora Eleanor, she help with the medical bills the insurance not cover. She drive him to chemo when I have to work the cleaning shift at the inn. She was, how do you say it? An angel. Unangle. Eleanor, who had always been generous with the church food drive, but careful with our money. Practical. She'd been quietly holding up an entire family for 16 years, paying their medical bills, giving them shelter, treating them like blood. Where is your husband now? I asked. He passed 3 years ago, Lourdes said quietly. Same sickness that takes Senora Eleanor. The same sickness. The room tilted. Time bent. Eleanor had cancer. Lourdes's eyes went wide. Her hand flew to her mouth. You, as you not know? My voice came out sharper than I meant. Know what? She fight cancer for 3 years, Senor Walter, Lourdes whispered. Pancreas. Same as my Tomas. She come here for treatments at Dana-Farber's outpost in Hyannis. She say she not want to worry you. She not want to be a burden. Now, I have to stop the story right here. Because if you've ever heard news that changed everything you thought was true, you know what happened to me in that moment. The walls of that little cottage tilted. The salt air coming through the window suddenly felt thick. I couldn't tell if I was sitting or falling. My wife had pancreatic cancer for 3 years, and she had told me nothing, while I was at the country club, while I was reading Patterson novels in my recliner, while I was complaining about her 4 annual trips. She had been driving herself to chemotherapy on Cape Cod, sleeping in this cottage between treatments, being cared for by a woman I had never met. The 4 trips a year, I said slowly. That's why she came. Lourdes nodded. Every 3 months. For the scans, for the treatment cycles. She stay with us. We take care of her. She was like mother to my children. I looked around the living room with new eyes this time. Really saw it. The crayon drawings. The small pairs of sandy sneakers lined up by the back door. The video game controller resting on a coffee table. How many children do you have? 3, Lourdes said with a sad, soft smile. Daniel is 23 now. He works as a mate on a fishing charter out of Chatham. Isabella is 19. She's at Cape Cod Community College, studying nursing. And little Mateo, he's 15. He plays soccer at the high school. They've lived in this cottage their whole lives. Daniel was 7 when we came here. Isabella was 3. Mateo was a baby. I tried to picture it. Eleanor coming here every 3 months. Not for relaxation, not for solitude as I'd always assumed, but for cancer treatments. Staying with this family who had quietly become her second family, surrounded by children who climbed into her lap. While she fought a disease she kept locked behind her teeth at home. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, though I wasn't really asking Lourdes. But she answered anyway. She say you have enough worry. She say you are good man. But you would not understand why she need this place. She say this was her secret garden, where she could be sick without making everyone sad. A secret garden. That's how Eleanor had thought of this cottage, not as real estate, not as an investment, as a sanctuary where she could be vulnerable without burdening anyone she loved. The money, I said suddenly. The taxes, the utilities, feeding all of you. Where did that come from? Lourdes looked uncomfortable. She had a job. She worked part-time at the little art gallery on Commercial Street in Provincetown. She say her paychecks stay here, for the house, for us. Eleanor had a job, my wife, who I'd thought was just taking pleasant little vacations 4 times a year, had been working a part-time job to support another family while battling pancreatic cancer alone. Senor Walter, Lourdes said carefully, your children, they know about us. Something inside my chest went cold. What do you mean? After Senora Eleanor pass. They come here. They tell us we have to leave. They say you are selling the cottage, and we have no right to be here. The son, he was very angry. He say we are taking advantage, stealing from family. The daughter, she was less angry. But she say we have to go before you find out anything. Bradley and Caroline knew. They knew about Lourdes and her family. They knew about Eleanor's cancer, and they had tried to evict an innocent, grieving family in secret. They had stood in my kitchen on Beacon Hill, lecturing me about wasted money, while knowing full well this cottage was the only home 3 children had ever known. Now, if you're listening to this and your blood is starting to boil, mine was too. But hold on to that feeling, because the next part is so much worse. What did you tell them? I asked. We tell them we wait to talk to you first. We respect Senora Eleanor too much to leave without you knowing the truth. The truth. My own children had buried the truth about their mother's secret life, about her cancer, about this family who had kept her company in her dying. They had been ready to throw a grieving family out into the cold rather than let me discover what kind of woman my wife had truly been. The screen door at the back of the cottage banged open. A teenage boy walked in, sandy and salt-streaked, shaking sand out of his sneakers. He was tall and lean, with dark eyes and a shock of curly black hair. When he saw me sitting there, he stopped cold. "Mommy," he said, his voice uncertain. "Mateo, come meet Senor Walter," Lourdes said gently. Senora Eleanor's husband. The boy's face shifted from caution to something almost like relief. "Senor Walter, Senora Eleanor talked about you all the time. She said you were a good man. She said you just needed time to understand." "Understand what?" I wanted to ask. But looking at this boy, a boy who had grown up under my roof, a boy my wife had loved like a grandson, I started to suspect that the person who needed to understand was not Eleanor. It was me. Mateo led me into the kitchen, where Lourdes had set out coffee and a plate of pastelitos still warm from the oven. He moved through that kitchen the way you only move through a place that's truly yours. He drummed his fingers on the table while he spoke. The exact same nervous habit Eleanor had. "Senora Eleanor always said you would come here someday. She kept a box of letters for you, in her room." "What letters?" I asked. Lourdes and Mateo exchanged a glance. "She wrote to you sometimes," Lourdes explained, "when she was scared or feeling alone. But she never sent them. She say maybe one day she will be brave enough. That day never come." My throat tightened until I could barely swallow. Eleanor had been writing me letters. For years. Pouring out things she couldn't say to my face. "Can I see them?" Lourdes hesitated. "Are you sure, Senor Walter? Some things, they may hurt to read." I considered that. In the past hour, I had learned my wife had fought cancer for 3 years in total silence, that she'd been quietly raising another family for 16 years, that my own children had known everything and chosen secrecy over truth. How much more pain could a few letters possibly contain? "I need to see them," I said. Lourdes nodded and rose. "Mateo, take Senor Walter to Senora Eleanor's room. I will bring the box." Mateo led me down a narrow hallway. I hadn't walked in over 26 years. He opened a door at the very end, and I stepped into what was unmistakably Eleanor's private sanctuary. The walls were soft sea-glass green. The bedroom window faced east, toward the water, with a writing desk angled to catch the morning light. Bookshelves lined the wall, filled with novels I'd never seen her read at home. Poetry collections, memoirs about illness, books about gardening. She spent a lot of time here, Mateo said quietly, especially when the medicine made her too tired to do anything else. On the nightstand was a framed photograph that punched the air out of me. It was a picture of us, our honeymoon in Bermuda, 41 years ago. We were standing on a pink sand beach, young and tan and so violently in love that I could feel it leaking out of the frame. Beside it was a more recent photograph. The three children, Daniel, Isabella, Matteo, building a sandcastle on the bay shore. Lourdes appeared in the doorway holding a wooden box. I recognized that box. I had built it for Eleanor in a woodworking class at the community center over 30 years ago. She'd told me she loved it. I'd never asked what she kept inside. "Take all the time you need," Lourdes said, setting the box on the desk. "We give you privacy." She closed the door softly behind her, and I was alone. Alone with 3 decades of my wife's silent thoughts. I sat down at her desk and opened the lid with shaking hands. Inside were dozens upon dozens of letters, neatly organized by date, going back almost 20 years. The earliest were on our regular monogrammed Boston stationery. The later ones were on different paper. Letterhead I didn't recognize. Hyannis Cancer Care Pavilion. I picked up a letter from somewhere in the middle, 3 years ago. "My dearest Walter, today Dr. Patel told me the cancer has come back. She wants to start the second round of chemotherapy right away. But I asked for a few days to think, not because I'm not going to fight, I am, but because I need to figure out how to do this without ruining the peace you finally found in retirement. You've been so happy these past few months. Playing golf with Henry and Frank. Reading those Lee Child novels you love. Smiling more than you have in 15 years. How can I take that from you? I know what you're thinking as you read this, that I should have told you immediately, that we should face this together. And you're right. But Walter, you spent 40 years carrying everyone. You worked 70-hour weeks at the firm. You held my hand through 3 miscarriages. You sat in waiting rooms during my mother's slow death from Alzheimer's. You held our children through every fever, every nightmare. You've earned the right to be a happy man without a wife dying in the next room. Lourdes says I'm being selfish, that I'm robbing you of the chance to be my hero one final time. But Walter, I've watched you be everyone's hero for so long. Maybe this time I can be my own. Maybe I need to know I can do something hard without leaning on you. The children don't need to know either. Bradley is so consumed with his promotion. Caroline has her hands full with the boys. They have their own lives. They shouldn't have to watch their mother fall apart. I hope someday I'll be brave enough to give you these letters. I hope someday I'll be able to explain why I needed this place, why I needed Lourdes and her family, why I needed to keep this part of myself separate. It's not because I love you any less. It's because I love you too much to watch you suffer through my suffering. I love you, Walter. I have loved you every single day for 38 years, even in the years when we felt like polite strangers sharing a hallway, especially then. Forever yours, Eleanor. I had to stop reading. My hands were trembling so hard the paper rattled. Tears were running down my face into my collar. Eleanor had been sick, scared, fighting for her life, and she'd done all of it alone, because she'd wanted to protect me from sadness. But the worst part was that she had been right. I had been happy in retirement. I had been golfing and reading and puttering around our brownstone, completely oblivious to my wife's pain. How had I become so deaf to the only person who had ever truly loved me? Now, if you're listening tonight and this is hitting you hard, please go look at the person beside you, or call them, or text them. Don't let your retirement be the place where your marriage goes silent. Don't let comfort become a reason to stop paying attention. I picked up another letter. This one from just over a year ago. My dearest Walter. Today was a good day. The latest scans show the tumors are responding to the new protocol. Dr. Patel is cautiously optimistic. I felt strong enough today to help Lourdes plant new dahlias along the front walk. Matteo taught me how to make friendship bracelets out of fishing line. Isabella showed me her acceptance letter from the nursing program. These people have become my family in a way I never thought possible. When I'm here, I'm not Eleanor the wife or Eleanor the mother. I'm just Eleanor, a woman who likes flowers and teenage gossip and the sound of children laughing through screen doors. I had forgotten that woman existed. I think about bringing you here sometimes. I imagine showing you the dahlia bed, introducing you to Daniel's girlfriend, Beatrice, watching you teach Matteo how to throw a proper slider. But then I remember how uncomfortable you get around new people, how you always feel like an outsider in other people's homes. This is my space, Walter. For the first time in my adult life, I have a space that belongs entirely to me. Does that make me a bad wife? I don't think you'd understand. You've always been so self-contained, so sure of who you are. You don't need other people the way I do. But I do, Walter. I need Matteo asking me to help with his English essay. I need Isabella whispering to me about boys. I need Lourdes's quiet strength. I need Tomas's terrible jokes and his famous arroz con pollo on Sunday nights. I need to feel needed in a way that has nothing to do with running a household. Is it wrong that I'm happier here than I am at home? Forever yours, Eleanor. I set the letter down and stared out the window at the slate-gray Atlantic. She had been right about me in some ways. I was uncomfortable around strangers. I did prefer my routines. But she had been wrong about the most important thing. I would not have been fine without her. I was not fine without her. There was a soft knock at the door. Lourdes peered in. "You okay, Señor Walter?" I wiped my face. "Lourdes, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course." Was she happy here? Truly happy? Lourdes thought for a long moment, looking out at the water. She was herself here. Sometimes sad. Sometimes scared. But always herself. At home, she said she felt like she was playing a role. Here, she could just be Eleanor. Just be Eleanor. My wife had felt like she was playing a role in our own marriage. What did that say about the life we had built together? "There is one more thing," Lourdes said carefully. "At the bottom of the box." She wrote it just before she got too sick to come here anymore. I dug through the letters and found an envelope marked, "For Walter. To be opened only if something happens to me." My hands trembled. After 41 years of marriage, I was finally about to learn what my wife really thought of our life together. The handwriting on this final letter was shakier than the others. There were watermarks on the paper from old tears. "My beloved Walter, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you finally found this place that meant so much to me. I hope Lourdes and her family have explained why I kept this secret from you. I hope you can understand, even if you cannot forgive me. I need to tell you something that will hurt you, and I am sorry for that. But you deserve the truth about our children, especially now, since I will not be there to soften them anymore. Bradley and Caroline have known about Lourdes and her family for over 2 years. They found out when Bradley was reviewing our financial accounts after I gave him power of attorney for the cottage. He saw the recurring payments for utilities, taxes, groceries. He hired a private investigator to find out what was happening. When they discovered Lourdes and the children living here, they did not come to me. They did not come to you. They came here, and they threatened them. They told Lourdes she was trespassing. They told her they would have her arrested. They threatened to call ICE on her family. They threatened to claim she had been stealing from us. Lourdes called me, terrified, sobbing. I drove down that same night. I confronted our children in this very kitchen. Walter, I have never seen them so cold. Bradley told me supporting Lourdes was fiscally irresponsible and that I was compromising their financial future. Caroline said I was being manipulated. When I tried to explain how this family had cared for me through chemotherapy, Bradley actually laughed. He said, "Mom, you're sick. You're not thinking clearly. These people are using your condition, using my condition, as if cancer had made me stupid instead of just exhausted." I told them about the treatments, about how Lourdes had driven me to Hyannis when I was too weak to drive myself, about how Tomas had built me a special padded chair for the porch so I could sit through the nausea, about how Matteo would read to me when I was too dizzy to focus, about how Isabella would brush my hair when it started growing back, slow and silver. Do you know what Caroline said? She said, "We could have done all of that for you, Mom. But Walter, they could not have. Not because they were incapable, but because they would have made my cancer about them, about their inconvenience, about their schedules, about their emotional burden. Lourdes never made me feel guilty for being sick. She never treated me as fragile. She just loved me. Our children gave me an ultimatum, Walter. Either I cut Lourdes off and sell the cottage, or they would take legal action to have me declared mentally incompetent due to my illness. They would claim I was being exploited. I chose Lourdes' family. I chose the people who had given me everything when I had needed everything. Bradley was furious. He said I was destroying our family legacy for people who weren't even citizens. Caroline cried and said I was choosing strangers over my own children. But Walter, they had stopped being strangers years ago. They were family in a way Bradley and Caroline had stopped being long ago. When did our children become so cruel? When did they stop seeing people as souls and start seeing them only as tax brackets? I made them swear not to tell you while I was alive. I did not want you forced to choose between them and me. But now that I am gone, you need to know who they really are. You need to know that when they pressure you to sell this cottage, it is not concern for your finances. It is rage that outsiders might benefit from what they consider their inheritance. I have spoken with a lawyer here on the Cape. Her name is Margaret Hollister. She has all the documents. She has options for you. Walter, you are a good man. You always have been. You worked hard. You were faithful. You loved us the best way you knew how. But somewhere along the way, we stopped really seeing each other. We became roommates. And our children learned to see relationships as ledgers. I do not blame you. I do not blame myself anymore either. Sometimes people just drift. But I hope you can find your way back to the man you were before the world made you tired. Lourdes and her family loved me, not for what I gave them, but for who I was when I was with them. I hope you can find a family that chooses you back. All my love, always and forever, your Ellie. I sat in that chair for a very long time, watching the sun set across the bay through Eleanor's window. My children had not just known about Eleanor's secret life. They had actively tried to crush it. They had threatened a grieving immigrant family. They had emotionally blackmailed their dying mother, all to protect money that wasn't even theirs yet. Now, if you're listening to this story right now and you have parents, I want you to think about something. Are you treating them like people? Or are you treating them like an estate that hasn't been distributed yet? Because there is a difference, and the older they get, the more they can feel which one you really see them as. The smell of cooking drifted from the kitchen. Lourdes was preparing dinner for her family, the same way she had every evening for 16 years. In the cottage, my children wanted to liquidate. There was another soft knock. Signor Walter? It was Isabella. I'd heard her come home earlier from her shift at the diner. Mommy says dinner is ready, if you want to eat with us. I looked up at this young woman Eleanor had watched grow from a toddler into an adult. She had her mother's gentle eyes and a shy smile that, somehow, reminded me of my wife. You don't have to, she added quickly. Mommy just thought you might be hungry. We always make too much food anyway. Too much food. Eleanor used to say I never made enough when it was my turn to cook. She said I had no sense of proportion, because I'd spent 40 years cooking for one while she was here, being part of a family that gathered around a real table, every single night. I'd like to eat with you, I said, standing up slowly. My knees ached. My heart felt like it weighed 100 pounds. In the kitchen, Lourdes had set an extra place at the table. Mateo was already seated, talking with Daniel about some boat engine that needed rebuilding. Daniel looked up when I came in. He had broad shoulders and a worker's tan, and he resembled his father in the photographs on the fridge. He stood up. Signor Walter, he said, extending his hand. I'm sorry we couldn't meet under better circumstances. Signora Eleanor talked about you constantly. She did? All the time, Isabella said, sliding into the seat beside me. She told us about the bookcase you built her, about how you used to take her dancing at the Charlestown Navy Yard when you were dating. She showed us pictures of the canoe you carved by hand. Eleanor had talked about my woodworking, about our courtship. I'd given up the woodworking decades ago, after retirement, because I couldn't see the point of building furniture nobody needed. But she'd kept the memory alive somewhere, spoken about it with pride. To strangers who became family. She said you were very gifted, Lourdes added, ladling rice and beans onto my plate. She said you had just forgotten how much you loved making things with your hands. As we ate, I listened to this family talk. Mateo was excited because he'd been bumped up to varsity soccer. Isabella was nervous about her clinicals. Daniel was saving up for a ring for Beatriz. Normal family conversation. The kind Eleanor and I used to have with Bradley and Caroline before they became adults who only called when they wanted something. Signor Walter, Mateo said as Lourdes brought out a small flan. Are you going to make us leave? The question hung in the kitchen. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Lourdes opened her mouth. Mateo, that is not appropriate. It's okay, I said. It's a fair question. I looked around the table at these people who had loved my wife when I was too distracted to notice she needed loving, who had nursed her through illness I never knew existed, who had given her the warmth our own children had stopped offering somewhere along the way. My phone buzzed. I knew without looking it was Bradley or Caroline. For the first time in 7 months, I turned my phone off without reading. I slept that night in Eleanor's bedroom, in the bed where she had recovered from chemotherapy I never knew about. The sound of the Atlantic was different than I'd expected. Not crashing, almost whispering. It eased something in my chest I hadn't known was clenched. In the morning, Lourdes brought me coffee in Eleanor's favorite mug, the blue one with hand-painted seashells. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," I admitted. And it was true. For the first time since Eleanor died, I had slept through an entire night without reaching for her side of the bed. "She slept good here too," Lourdes said, "even when she was very sick. She say the ocean reminds her she is small, that it makes the sickness feel small too." I sipped the coffee, stronger than anything I'd brewed for myself at home. "Lourdes, do you want to stay here? Honestly. Not because you feel obligated to honor Eleanor's memory, but because this is your home." Lourdes looked out the window for a long time. "My children were born in Florida, but they grew up here. Mateo never knew anywhere else. Isabella graduated from Nauset High. Daniel met Beatriz at the Marina. This is not just where we live, Senor Walter. This is where we belong. And me being here. Does that feel strange?" "No," she said immediately. "Senora Eleanor used to say this house was too big for one person. She said it needed family to make it alive again." Family. I'd been turning that word over in my hands all morning. Blood didn't automatically make family. Living in the same brownstone for 4 decades didn't guarantee connection. Family was something you built with daily kindness and showing up. My phone had been buzzing relentlessly since the night before. I finally turned it back on. 23 missed calls, 31 text messages, most from Bradley and Caroline, some from their spouses, even from Caroline's 2 teenage sons. The messages followed a familiar arc. Concern. "Pop, are you okay?" Then irritation. "We're worried sick." Then anger. "This is unacceptable. We're driving down." The most recent, from Bradley, sent at 6 that morning. "Pop, we know something is wrong. We're leaving Boston now. Don't do anything rash before we talk. Don't do anything rash. Like honoring my wife's wishes. Like treating human beings with basic dignity. Now, if you've ever had family members trying to control your decisions through guilt and panic, you know exactly what I felt in that moment." I looked at Lourdes. "My children are coming. They'll be here by lunch." Fear flashed across her face. "We can leave for the day. Take the children to my sister's." "No." The word came out hard. "This is your home, Lourdes. You don't run from your own home." I walked to Eleanor's desk. Among the scattered letters was a business card. Margaret Hollister, estate attorney. Eleanor had been planning ahead even at her sickest. I called the number. A warm, professional voice picked up on the second ring. "Miss Hollister, this is Walter Pendleton. I believe my late wife, Eleanor Pendleton, was a client. Mr. Pendleton." "Yes. Eleanor was a dear friend, not just a client. I am so deeply sorry for your loss. She was an extraordinary woman. I'm at our cottage. I've discovered things. I need to understand what she set up. Of course. Are you free this morning? I have her file right here." Margaret Hollister's office was in a converted whaling captain's home in Provincetown. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, silver-haired, the kind of attorney who clearly didn't suffer fools. "Eleanor came to me 3 years ago," she said, spreading documents across her desk. "She wanted to make sure Lourdes's family would be protected if anything happened to her. We worked together for months on every contingency. She handed me a thick folder. There is a living trust. The cottage cannot be sold without giving Lourdes's family adequate notice and substantial relocation assistance. There is also a life insurance policy. Eleanor purchased specifically to fund the cottage expenses for 10 years. 10 years. Eleanor had planned a full decade past her own death to make sure this family stayed safe. Your children cannot evict Lourdes's family. Eleanor made absolutely certain of that. But more importantly, she left you with options. What kind of options?" Margaret smiled gently. Eleanor was very specific about what she hoped you would choose, but she knew she could not force your hand. She set up 3 scenarios, fully documented. She laid out 3 folders. Option 1. You sell the cottage. Lourdes's family receives 6 months' notice and $75,000 in relocation assistance. Option 2. You keep ownership but sign a long-term lease with lords, formalizing them as tenants with full legal protection. Option 3. She paused. Option 3. You transfer ownership of the cottage to Lorda's family outright. You use the life insurance proceeds Eleanor left to purchase a smaller property nearby for yourself. A smaller property nearby. Eleanor had even planned for the possibility that I might want to stay. She really thought of everything. Eleanor spent months working through every detail. She wanted everyone treated fairly. But Mr. Pendleton, I should tell you, she hoped you would choose option 3. Why? Margaret leaned back. Because she said you'd been lost since retirement. She said you needed a purpose, a family that needed you, not just for your money. She believed Lords and the children could give you that. Now, let me say something here. Because if you're sitting at home tonight, watching this story, and you've been feeling lost since you retired, you are not alone. So many men, especially in the United States, define their entire identity through their work, and when the job is gone, suddenly they are floating. Eleanor had seen that in me. She had been planning my second life. Even while she was dying, there was one more thing. Margaret slid a small, sealed envelope across the desk. Eleanor asked me to give you this, only if you came here and met Lords' family yourself. Inside was a short note in Eleanor's handwriting. Walter, if you are reading this, then you have seen what real family looks like. Don't let our children's greed bury something beautiful. Choose love. Choose belonging. Choose the life we forgot how to give each other. All my love. Ellie. My phone rang. Bradley. Pop. Where the hell are you? We're at the cottage. There are people here claiming they live here. I could hear Caroline shouting in the background. I could hear Matteo trying, in his careful and respectful English, to explain things. I'm handling business in town, I said. I'll be back within the hour. Pop, do not do anything stupid. We need to talk before you make any decisions about these people. These people, as if Lourdes and her children were objects to be sorted. Bradley, I want you and Caroline to sit at that kitchen table. Eat the lunch Lourdes is making. Listen to what they have to say. And remember, your mother loved them. Pop, you are clearly being manipulated. I hung up. I turned the phone off. Margaret was watching me with something that looked almost like pride. What are you going to do? I looked down at the legal documents that would make Lourdes' family the rightful owners of the cottage Eleanor had treasured. The cottage where she had faced her cancer, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. I'm going to honor my wife's wishes, I said, picking up the pen. And I'm going to choose the family that chose her. Now, I want you to imagine this for a second. Imagine being 74 years old, standing at a desk in Provincetown, finally signing your name to the truth your wife had been writing for years. Imagine the weight of 41 years of missed conversations finally settling in the right place. As I signed those papers, something shifted inside me. Not grief, not anger, not the hollow emptiness I'd carried for 7 months. Peace. For the first time since my wife died, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When I drove back to the cottage an hour later, Bradley's BMW and Caroline's Audi were still in the driveway. But the energy had changed. Through the kitchen window, I could see my children sitting at Lourdes' table. They looked uncomfortable, but not hostile anymore. Isabella was showing Caroline something on her phone, probably nursing school photographs. Matteo was telling Bradley something with animated hand gestures. Lourdes met me at the door. Her eyes searched mine. It's done, I said quietly. I handed her the deed, with her name on it. This is your cottage now, legally, officially. Tears filled her eyes. Señor Walter, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just let me stay for one more dinner. As your guest. We walked into the kitchen together. My children's faces shifted when they saw I was not carrying real estate listings or eviction papers. I was carrying peace. And for the first time in 7 months, I was home. Now, let me tell you what this story teaches us. Because there are lessons buried in here that every American family should hear. First lesson. The people who care most about your inheritance are rarely the people who care most about you. Watch carefully who shows up before you die, and who only shows up afterward, with a calculator. Second lesson. In this country, we treat our elderly like inconvenient files to be archived. Don't let your kids do that to you. You have rights. Under federal law, financial elder abuse, including coercion to sell property, is a crime in all 50 states. If your adult children are pressuring you to liquidate assets, you are entitled to consult an estate attorney without telling them. You are entitled to set up a trust they cannot override. You are entitled to designate a power of attorney who is not in your immediate family. The Elder Care Locator at 1-800-677-1116 connects you to free local resources. AARP has free legal counsel referrals in every state. Adult Protective Services exists in every county for a reason. Use them. Third lesson. The biggest mistake most of us make in marriage is assuming that comfort means closeness. Comfort can become silence. Silence can become two people quietly mourning a marriage they're still inside of. If you're married right now, ask your spouse a real question tonight. Not how was your day? Something deeper. What have you been carrying alone lately? That question alone could save a marriage. Fourth lesson, and this one is the hardest. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes the people who hold your hand at 3 in the morning aren't related to you at all. And that's okay. That's actually how it's supposed to be sometimes. So tonight, I want you to do one specific thing. Pick up your phone. Text someone who has been chosen family to you. Tell them they matter. Don't wait until they're gone. And ask yourself this question before you sleep tonight. If I died tomorrow, who would actually mourn me? Who would feel my absence like a missing limb? Make sure those people know they matter, while you still can. Now, if you're still here with me at the end of this story, thank you, truly. I want to hear from you in the comments. Comment 1 if you think Walter did the right thing transferring the cottage. Comment 2 if you think his children deserved a quicker forgiveness. Comment 3 if you've ever been in a similar situation where family fought over a parent's inheritance. And right below that, tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country, what time it is wherever you are. I genuinely love reading every comment from every corner of the world. It blows my mind that one story can travel that far. That night, after Bradley and Caroline drove back to Boston in stunned silence, I sat alone on the porch Eleanor had loved. Lourdes had given me her spare room. Tomorrow, I would start looking at small cottages nearby. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. I had finally found the family Eleanor had been quietly building for me all along. Disclaimer. This is a fictional story inspired by common situations many American families face, but it has been 100% rewritten by me, here in New York, to avoid reused content and to bring you something genuinely original. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that little bell so you don't miss the next one. There are so many more stories like this coming. Stay kind, stay awake, and don't wait until someone is gone to ask them who they really were.